Take a seat, please. Make yourself comfortable here on the porch. Today, I want to talk to you about something we all think we understand, but very few of us actually practice. Support. As an architect, my entire life is defined by that word. I spend my days calculating how much weight a beam can take before it snaps. I study the tension of cables and the compression of stone. I know that if an arch isn't perfectly balanced, the whole structure, no matter how beautiful, will eventually crumble into dust. But not long ago, I learned that the most important structures in this world aren't made of granite or steel. They are made of flesh, blood, and the choices we make when we think no one is looking. I learned this on a Saturday morning that started like any other. In a place that was supposed to be a sanctuary of knowledge, but felt more like a fortress of indifference. It was one of those Boston mornings where the sky is the color of a bruised plum and the rain doesn't just fall, it clings to you. I had retreated to my favorite corner of the Athenaeum Library Cafe. If you've never been there, imagine a place where time seems to slow down. The walls are lined with leather-bound books that have seen centuries pass, and the air smells like a mix of old parchment and dark roast espresso. I was 28 years old, and like most architects my age, I was obsessed with the perfect line. I sat there with my sketchbook, my fingers slightly stained with graphite. I wasn't there to work on a commission. I was there for my Saturday escape. I was sketching the vaulted ceilings of the library. I've always been fascinated by arches. Think about it. An arch is a miracle of physics. It's two sides that are constantly leaning on each other. If one side pulls away, the other falls. They find their greatest strength in their mutual vulnerability. I found peace in that thought. I felt safe in my corner, surrounded by the hum of the heater and the muffled whispers of the cafe. The cafe was packed. Every velvet chair and mahogany stool was occupied. It was a perfect microcosm of our modern world. I sat there, sipping my black coffee, no sugar. I like to taste the bitterness and I began to do what I always do. I observed to my left. There was a man who looked like he stepped out of a luxury car advertisement. He was in his 50s, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first car. He had 3 different devices laid out on his table: a laptop, a tablet, and a smartphone. He was checking stock market tickers with a ferocity that made him look like a soldier in a war of numbers. He didn't look up once, not even to acknowledge the waiter. He had built a wall of technology around himself, a fortress of busy. Further down, there was a group of university students. They were young, full of energy, and completely oblivious to anything outside their 3-foot radius. They were laughing about a party from the night before, their expensive textbooks open but ignored. They were rich in time and health, yet they used that wealth to occupy space as if they were the only ones who existed. I felt a strange sense of detachment. I was looking at these people as if they were blueprints, not human beings. I was calculating the space they occupied, the weight they brought to the room. I thought I was seeing the world clearly. I thought I understood how society was built. But then the atmosphere in the room changed. It wasn't a loud noise. It wasn't a shout. It was a rhythm. Thump, clack, 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 in a room full of soft whispers and the clinking of porcelain. This sound was like a heartbeat. It was the sound of effort. It was the sound of someone fighting for every inch of progress. I looked up from my drawing of the Gothic arch. I put my pencil down. And that's when I saw her standing at the entrance of the cafe. She was drenched, her olive green jacket heavy with rainwater, and she was leaning on 2 aluminum crutches as she stood there, scanning the room for a place to sit. I saw something that no architect's blueprint could ever capture. I saw the exact moment when a room full of civilized people decided that she didn't exist. I saw the shutters go down behind their eyes. And as she took her first painful step toward the nearest table, I realized that I was about to witness a collapse far more devastating than any falling building. Asterisk. The first thing that hit me wasn't her face. It was the smell. It was the scent of wet wool and cold, metallic rain that follows someone who has been fighting a storm for too long. When she pushed open those heavy oak doors, a gust of wind followed her, making the pages of my sketchbook flutter. For a second, the warmth of the cafe felt stolen. She stood there, framed by the gray light of the doorway. I put my pencil down. My hand was frozen medarge. I've spent years studying how structures handle stress, but I had never seen stress like this. She was in her early 30s, maybe 32. She wore an olive green jacket that was soaked through, turning a dark, muddy shade of forest green. Her hair, a deep chestnut color, was matted to her forehead by the rain. But it was her posture that held me captive. She was leaning heavily on 2 aluminum crutches. Her shoulders were hiked up to her ears, a sign of pure, grinding physical exertion. And then, as she shifted her weight to close the door behind her, I saw it. The light from the chandelier above caught the surface of her right leg. It wasn't skin. It was a matte black high-tech prosthetic made of carbon fiber and steel. It was a masterpiece of engineering, something I, as an architect, could normally spend hours admiring. But seeing it there, attached to a person who looked like she was on the verge of collapsing, made the metal look cold. Bone-chillingly cold. She didn't move for a long time. She just stood by the door, her chest heaving in shallow, ragged breaths. Have you ever been so tired that your vision starts to blur? I could see that look in her eyes. She was scanning the room, not for a friend, not for a menu, but for a foundation. She needed to sit down. Her remaining leg was trembling, a subtle, violent vibration that I could see even from my corner. I watched the room react to her. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash of human empathy. The man in the charcoal suit, the titan of industry I had been observing, looked up from his laptop for exactly 1 second. His eyes landed on the crutches, then traveled down to the prosthetic. I saw his lip curled just a fraction of a millimeter. It wasn't disgust. It was inconvenience. He immediately looked back at his screen, and with a calculated rhythmic movement, he slid his leather briefcase from the floor onto the empty chair beside him. He didn't just deny her a seat. He fortified his position. He built a wall. I felt a knot form in my stomach. I looked around. I wanted anyone to wave her over. The students were still laughing, but their laughter felt sharper now, like broken glass. They had seen her. I know they had. But they suddenly became intensely interested in their phones, their thumbs moving with frantic energy to avoid making eye contact. Finally, she took her first step into the cafe. Thump, clack, thump, clack. In a library, silence is supposed to be sacred. But this silence was different. It was heavy. It was the kind of silence that happens when everyone is holding their breath, hoping that someone else will be the hero so they don't have to be. Every time her crutches hit the floor, I felt it in my own spine. She was moving toward the center of the room. I noticed the way she had to swing her prosthetic leg, a mechanical sweeping motion that required immense core strength. She was sweating. In a room that was kept at a perfect 68 degrees. Beads of perspiration were rolling down her temples, mixing with the rainwater. She reached the first row of tables. I saw her eyes lock onto a small, round table where a woman was reading a digital book. There was a stool free. Just one. I held my breath. I thought, this is it. Someone is going to help. The woman with the book didn't even wait for the stranger to speak. Without looking up, she placed her hand firmly on the empty stool, as if she were protecting a child, and pulled it closer to her own legs. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The message was written in the tension of her shoulders. This space is mine. You are a complication I didn't ask for. I watched the stranger's face. I expected anger. I expected her to shout, to demand the respect she deserved. But what I saw was far worse. I saw a quiet, crushing acceptance. She simply adjusted her grip on the crutches. I could see the calluses on her palms, and kept moving. She was coming closer to my corner now. I felt my heart hammering against my ribs. My Saturday escape was over. The perfect lines of my Gothic arches on the paper looked like lies. How could I draw something so beautiful in a room that was behaving so ugly? She stopped just a few feet away from me. She was swaying. Her eyes were glazed over with that dull sheen of overexhaustion. She looked like a building whose central pillar had finally given way. She looked like she was about to fall right there, in the middle of the Athenaeum Cafe, as she turned her head toward the exit. resigning herself to the fact that there was no room for her in this civilized sanctuary. I saw her crutch slip on a patch of water she had brought in from the street. Her eyes widened in fear, and for a split second, the entire room held its breath as she began to tilt toward the hard marble floor. My apologies for the language switch. Let's get back into the heart of Boston. To make this resonate with a U.S. audience, I've infused the descriptions with specific cultural cues: the not my problem city attitude, the tech-obsessed library culture, and the crushing weight of social performance. Time didn't just slow down. It curdled. In that split second when Sarah's crutch skidded on the puddle she'd brought in from the Boston rain, I saw the architecture of her body falter. As an architect, I know what happens when a load-bearing pillar loses its footing. It's a terrifying, silent slide toward a collapse. But Sarah did something that defied physics, with an effort that made the tendons in her neck stand out like steel cables. She jammed her other crutch into the floor so hard, the sound echoed like a gunshot through the vaulted ceiling. She stayed upright. And do you know what the most chilling part was? Nobody moved. Not a single person reached out a hand. The man in the charcoal suit didn't even look away from his stock ticker. It was as if a do not disturb sign had been hung over the entire room's collective soul. The indifference wasn't just passive. It was a vacuum, sucking the oxygen right out of the room. Sarah took a ragged breath, closed her eyes for a heartbeat, and straightened her spine. There was a quiet dignity in her struggle that made me feel small, sitting there in my safe corner with my warm ceramic mug. That's when she began her final journey through the room, searching for the one thing this city of higher learning seemed to lack, a place where her humanity was accepted as she took her next step. Her prosthetic leg let out a hyped, mechanical whine, a sound of metal under too much stress. I saw her wince, and for a second, thought the machinery itself was about to give way right there on the marble floor. She approached the first table. It was a young couple, probably my age, looking like they'd just stepped out of a high-end boutique on Newberry Street. They were surrounded by shopping bags and 2 oversized lattes that had barely been touched. There was a velvet chair between them, currently occupied by an expensive-looking cashmere coat. "Excuse me," Sarah said. Her voice was a raspy whisper, but it carried perfectly through the library's heavy silence. "Would you mind if I sat here for just a moment? I've walked quite a way in the rain. I just need to rest my leg before I keep going." I watched the young man look at her prosthetic leg. I saw the discomfort cross his face like an unwanted shadow. He glanced at the girl, who quickly checked her gold watch and looked away. "Oh, we're so sorry," he lied, with a politeness that tasted like vinegar. "We're actually waiting for 2 friends. They should be here any second, and we need the seat for our things." Sarah looked at the coat on the chair, then into the boy's empty eyes. She knew it was a lie. I knew it was a lie. But she just nodded, a gesture of grace that felt like a punch to my gut. "Of course, I apologize for the intrusion," she kept going. Thump, clack, thump, clack. Each step seemed to require more fuel than her body had left. She reached the table of a woman who was buried in a MacBook, surrounded by a spider web of white charging cables, external batteries, and 2 iPhones. She was occupying a 4-person table all by herself. Her private office in the middle of a public space. Sarah didn't ask for much. "Just a corner of the table to lean against? Could you share this space with me? I won't be long." The woman didn't even fully remove her noise-canceling headphones. She just slid them down to her neck and let out a sigh of pure annoyance. As if Sarah were a pop-up ad in a perfect operating system. "I really need the space for my gear," she snapped, pointing to her cables spread out like tentacles. "I'm on a deadline. There are stools in the back by the emergency exit." There were no stools in the back. Sarah looked at the distance she'd still have to travel. I saw, for the first time, a single tear mixed with the rainwater on her cheek. She was hitting her structural limit just as Sarah turned to head for the back. A library security guard started walking toward her. He wasn't smiling. My heart hammered. Was he coming to help her, or was he about to tell her she couldn't stand in the aisles? The guard walked right past her to adjust a thermostat. He didn't even see her. The most bitter moment, though, was the 3rd table. An older man, looking every bit the Harvard professor, was surrounded by heavy, leather-bound books. He was reading a massive tome titled Ethics and Moral Philosophy in Ancient Greece. I almost wanted to laugh at the cruel irony. Sarah could barely speak now. The physical effort of keeping her body upright on those crutches was draining her final reserves. Please, just a moment. The scholar didn't even lift his eyes from the page. He simply pushed a stack of books to the empty side of the table, blocking the access as if he were building a fortification. "This is a quiet study area," he murmured, his voice cold and academic. "The sound of your equipment is quite distracting. Perhaps you should find a more suitable environment for your condition." My hand gripped my pencil so hard, the graphite snapped against the paper, leaving a jagged scar across my sketch of the Gothic arch. Here was a man studying virtue while practicing cruelty. That was the final collapse for me. Sarah stopped in the middle of the aisle. She didn't try a fourth table. She looked at the door, at the Boston rain still lashing against the windows, and I saw the light in her eyes go out. She felt invisible. Worse than that, she felt like a burden. I looked at my drawings. Perfect lines. Buildings that would never fall. But what was the point of building stone cathedrals if the people inside had hearts made of dry ice? I realized that the true architecture of a society isn't in the concrete. It's in how we support each other when the ground starts to shake. Sarah started to turn around. She was going back to the cold. She was going to accept that in this room full of enlightenment. It wasn't a single inch for her. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard it hurt. I felt the weight of my own silence crushing me. Sarah took the first step toward the exit, her head bowed. But then she stopped. She leaned her head against the cool marble of a pillar, and I saw her shoulders begin to shake. I realized then if I didn't stand up in the next 5 seconds, I wouldn't just be an architect. I'd be the engineer of my own cowardice. I stood up so fast my coffee cup rattled dangerously on the table. Asterisk. Wait. The word didn't just leave my mouth. It exploded. I hadn't planned it. It was a reflex, like a structural beam snapping under too much pressure. My chair screeched against the marble floor, a harsh, ugly sound that seemed to indict everyone in the room. I felt the heat of 50 pairs of eyes on me. The man in the charcoal suit looked up, his face twisted in a mask of annoyed confusion. The students stopped whispering. Even the steam wand on the espresso machine hissed into silence. Sarah stopped. She was only 3 feet from the heavy glass doors, 3 feet from disappearing back into the relentless Boston rain. She didn't turn around immediately. Her shoulders dropped, and for a second, I thought she was going to ignore me, that she was too tired to even acknowledge another voice in this cold room. But then, she rotated. It was a slow, mechanical pivot on her left leg, her crutches wide for stability. When she finally looked at me, I didn't see relief. I saw suspicion. I saw the look of someone who had been told no so many times that she was bracing for a fourth rejection. Before I could even open my mouth, I stood there, my heart hammering against my ribs, realizing I hadn't actually thought about what to say next. I was an architect who had just demolished the silence, and now I had to build something in its place. "I'm sorry to shout," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I gestured toward my table, the large mahogany corner unit I had been protecting all morning. "I've been sitting here for 2 hours pretending that these sketches are the most important thing in the world. But the truth is, this table is far too big for one person and a few messy blueprints." I took a breath and looked her straight in the eyes. "Please, it would be an honor if you'd share this space with me. The coffee is better than the rain, I promise." The silence stretched. I could feel the businessman to my left staring at me, probably wondering why I was bothering with her. But Sarah didn't look at him. She looked at me. She looked at my sketchbook, then at the empty chair I was pulling out. "Are you sure?" she asked. Her voice was thin, like parchment paper. "I don't want to be a distraction." "The only distraction," I said, looking pointedly at the man in the charcoal suit, "is the silence we've all been keeping. Please, sit." Asterisk. It took her a long time to reach the table. I watched the process, the calculated, grueling mechanics of it. She had to swing her prosthetic leg in a wide arc, planting the rubber tips of her crutches with surgical precision. When she finally reached the chair, she didn't just sit. She lowered herself with a heavy, exhausted sigh that seemed to vibrate through the wood. Click, whir, snap. That was the sound of her. Prosthetic locking into a seated position. It was a loud industrial sound, and I saw her flinch, waiting for someone to complain about the noise. I just smiled and pushed my sketchbook aside. "I'm Julian," I said, extending my hand. She hesitated, then reached out. Her grip was surprising, firm, calloused, and strong. "Sarah," she replied. "And thank you, Julian." I was about 5 seconds away from giving up on this city. Sat in silence for a moment as the cafe slowly returned to its normal hum. But the atmosphere had changed. The wall had been breached. I watched Sarah take a sip of the coffee I'd ordered for her, and I noticed a small faded tattoo on her forearm. It was a medical caduceus. The staff with the serpent's butt underneath it were 4 digits, a military unit number. My heart skipped a beat. I realized I wasn't sitting across from just any stranger. "You're military?" I asked softly, nodding toward her arm. Sarah looked at the tattoo, then back at me. A wry, tired smile touched her lips. "Combat medic," she said. "2 tours in the Middle East. I spent 10 years of my life pulling people out of places they weren't supposed to be." I looked at her prosthetic leg, the matte black carbon fiber, with a new sense of awe. "Was it? Over there?" She shook her head, her chestnut hair swaying. "No, that's the irony of it, Julian. I survived the IEDs. I survived the ambushes. I came home to Boston thinking the danger was over. I lost the leg 6 months ago, right here in the States." I leaned in. The library around us seemed to vanish. "What happened?" "I was off duty," she began, her eyes focusing on something far beyond the library walls. "Driving home through a storm just like this one, I saw an old tenement building, one of those beautiful brick structures from the 1920s, on fire. The fire department hadn't arrived yet. People were standing on the sidewalk, filming it with their phones. Just like the people in this cafe, Julian. They were watching a tragedy through a screen, as if it wasn't real." She took a shaky breath. "I heard a woman screaming that her son was still on the 3rd floor. I didn't think. I'm a medic. My body moved before my brain could tell it to stop. I went in." Sarah stopped talking. She stared into her coffee, and I saw her hand begin to tremble. "I'm an architect. I know how those old buildings are constructed." I knew exactly what happened next, but hearing her say it was like watching a skyscraper collapse in slow motion. "The structure gave way, didn't it?" I whispered. "The joists were rotten," she said. "I found the boy. I had him in my arms, tucked under my jacket. I was 5 feet from the window when the floor turned into sand. I managed to throw him toward the fireman's ladder, but the beam, the main support beam, it came down on my leg. I spent 45 minutes pinned under 3 tons of history while the building burned around me. I sat there, paralyzed. I looked at my sketches of Gothic arches and vaulted ceilings. I felt sick. I spend my life making sure beams stay up, and one of those beams had nearly ended her life while she was saving another. When the doctors told me they couldn't save the leg, Sarah continued, her voice gaining a strange, haunting strength, I didn't cry. I had seen enough people lose everything in the desert to know that a leg is a small price for a life. The boy is 6 years old now. He's healthy. That's my wealth, Julian. She looked around the room at the man in the suit, at the students, at the woman with the cables. But coming back here, that's been the real battle. In the field, if a soldier is down, you move heaven and earth to get them to safety. You don't ask if they have a reservation for the seat. You don't check if their gear is taking up too much space. You just see a human being in need and you act. She leaned forward, her eyes piercing mine. People in this city. They aren't under burning buildings, Julian, but they're trapped under something else. They're buried under their own egos. They've built these massive lives, these huge careers, but they've forgotten to leave a door open for anyone else. They are the most well-housed, well-fed, lonely people I've ever met. I realized then that I wasn't the one helping Sarah. She was the one helping me. She was showing me the blueprint of a broken society. But as I looked at her, I saw a flicker of something in her pocket, a folded piece of paper that looked like a legal notice. I wondered if the hero who saved a child was now facing a battle that even her courage couldn't win. Asterisk, I looked at that folded piece of paper peeking out of Sarah's pocket. It was yellow, the unmistakable color of a legal notice. For a second, the architect in me wanted to look away. We like clean lines and finished projects. We don't like the messy, jagged edges of a life in transition. Sarah, I said, my voice barely a whisper. That paper, is everything okay? She followed my gaze and pulled the notice out, smoothing it on the table. It was an eviction warning. The hero who had walked into a furnace to save a child was being squeezed out of her apartment because her disability. Checks were late and her support system had collapsed under the weight of bureaucracy. Ironic, isn't it? She said, without a hint of bitterness. I saved a home for a family, and now I'm struggling to keep my own. But Julian, don't look at me with that face. This isn't a tragedy. It's just physics. Sometimes the load is heavier than the beams can handle. You just have to find a new way to distribute the weight. She stood up then. The process was just as slow and just as grueling as before. I reached out to help, but she gave me a look that wasn't prideful, it was just firm. She needed to do this. Click. Whir. Snap. Her prosthetic locked into place. She adjusted her crutches, her knuckles white against the grips. Thank you for the coffee, Julian. But mostly, thank you for the space. You'd be surprised how much a simple chair can feel like a throne when everyone else tells you there's no room. I watched her walk toward the door. Thump, clack, thump, clack. The cafe was still full. The businessman was still trading. The students were still laughing. The woman with the cables was still busy. Sarah passed the table of the couple with the designer coat. The girl pulled her bags even closer, as if Sarah's struggle might be contagious. Nobody stood up. Nobody offered her a phone number or a hand with the door. They just watched her, rather. They watched the inconvenience of her move out of their lives. When she pushed open the glass doors, a final gust of cool, fresh air swept into the library, and then she was gone. The rhythmic sound of her struggle was replaced by the low, humming silence of people who have everything but possess nothing. I sat there for a long time. I looked down at my sketchbook. My drawing of the Gothic arch was still there, but it looked different now. I realized that for 10 years, I had been studying the wrong thing. I had been studying how to build walls and roofs. I had been studying how to keep the rain out, but I hadn't learned a single thing about how to let the people in. I picked up my pencil. I didn't finish the sketch of the library. Instead, I drew something else. I drew a simple chair. An empty chair at a crowded table. You see, we live in a world that is obsessed with growth. We want bigger houses, taller skyscrapers, and larger bank accounts. We think that if we accumulate enough stuff, we've built a life that is secure. We call that wealth. But sitting there in the silence of the Athenaeum, I realized that we've been lied to. If you have $1 million but no room in your heart for a stranger's pain, you are bankrupt. If you have a PhD in ethics, but you can't move your books to let a hero sit down, you are uneducated. If you are building a kingdom where only you are allowed to sit on the throne, you aren't an architect, you're a prisoner. I wrote a phrase at the bottom of that page, and I want to share it with you now, here on the porch. It's not just about the horizontal what you own, where you live, or what you've achieved. It's about the vertical. It's about the depth of your character and the height of your empathy. It's measured by your capacity to see the invisible, to hear the silent, and to offer a foundation to someone whose world is shaking. Sarah is still out there. There are thousands of Sarahs out there, heroes who have given everything, only to find that the world they protected has no place for them to rest. The next time you're in a crowded room, I want you to look up. Don't look at the screens. Don't look at the busyness. Look for the person who is struggling to find a seat. Move your coat. Close your laptop. Make a little room, because the truth is, we are all just one storm away from needing someone to pull out a chair for us. And the architecture of our lives is only as strong as the kindness we offer when there's no room at the table. I'm Julian Vance, and this is the truth I found on the porch today. Keep building, my friends. But remember, build bridges, not just walls. I'll see you in the next story.